Hey everybody, this is Richard and welcome to another episode of Fatal Error. This show began as a research project for me to understand how entrepreneurs and founders think about the climate emergency and figure out ways in which all organizations, not just non-profits, can become climate positive. Today's guest is Lola Oyelayo-Pearson, designer, activist and director of user experience at Shopify. In our short conversation, we cover a wide range of topics from how to tackle wicked problems to climate justice to whether organizations like Extinction Rebellion are filling a necessary role or are just a plaything for the privileged. Let's hear what she has to say. And then I saw that you spoke at a couple of different, or rather you're active in a number of different areas, right? So there was a panel that you spoke about tech helping to solve climate change. I can't remember which event that was. Give me a second. I want to say that I have a.
So that was.
Can technology
I think that was the
World on Fire. Was this it?
Afro Tech Fest. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this was the bit that kind of caught you. Said like, okay, I need to speak to Lola about this because. That here, what you were kind of pitching, I suppose, for this panel, was it a panel or a talk?
It was a panel.
It was a panel, right?
Yeah.
But it was, you're talking about the situation where the web, where the internet is the fourth largest carbon emitter in the world after a couple of like massive countries like the US, China, and India, right? So I wanted to talk to you about that topic in general, but then. You're also active in a few other sort of design kind of groups, I think, right? Am I correct in saying that they're kind of focused on sort of grassroots activities for kind of underrepresented sectors in tech, or am I mistaken there?
I mean, you could argue. So I'm basically invested as a Black woman in like equity and using design as a form of activism to try and create more equity in the world in general.
Okay.
But part of that route is making sure that we have broader representation of different groups and diverse voices in the tech industry, because whether we can resist it or not, this is kind of the future of almost any kind of service layer you can imagine, whether civic or private sector, it's coming through tech. And so I am always interested in trying to make sure that we are fully represented as we should be in all of those forums.
Yes. And, without being sort of too, I don't know, what the word is, but I suppose in the UK, right, a lot of the conversation, I guess, I'm not originally from the UK. I'm from Malta, but it's sort of a European country, mostly considered like I kind of like I'm considered white. I consider myself white in the UK. Most of the conversation tends to be dominated by white people in the kind of climate space. I'll be honest, like that's where I've mostly seen, which is not different to many other things. So this is another reason where I was excited to talk to you about, because I suspect that there's a very different kind of, I don't know, set of viewpoints there that are being missed by me. I don't. Yeah. That's what I care about at the moment.
I understand that. Yeah.
And on the whole thing, both the sort of the equality side of it, the sustainability side of it, they're these like wicked problems, right? They're called in design. You're familiar with the term, I think, which is like
I've done a few talks, yeah.
Okay, so there you go. And when the term wicked problem makes it sound exciting almost, but actually it's something which is very, very hard to deal with, right? So that's what I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay. I should probably say I do have a hard stop at 4:15.
That's fantastic. So we've got
20 minutes, 25 minutes.
20 minutes to save the world. Perfect.
Okay. No difficulty there. Yeah.
So I have a few things to guide us through the conversation, but I'm mainly interested in the chat. So if we can start off with, you, Lola, specifically on the climate emergency side of things, you just briefly tell you like what your position is here? What you know, how do you feel about the whole thing? Because that's our main topic initially.
Yeah. So I am concerned. I believe the science. I think we should do more. I think we should be doing lots of things all of the time. But as a kind of a third culture kid, which I think is a phrase, I can't remember exactly who coined it, that relates to people like myself who were born in one country, raised in another, and may have moved around quite a bit.
Okay.
I have multiple perspectives in my head. So in the West, as we would say, so kind of living in the Northern Hemisphere and working in the Northern Hemisphere and kind of building my career here, I have a privilege to challenge actions that are against climate and kind of not necessarily helping to slow down some of the negative effects, because we have recycling infrastructure and we have alternatives to plastic and alternatives to carbon-based fuels. My mother still lives in Nigeria. My family, a huge part of my family is there. I was born there. I spend a lot of time there. Those options are genuinely a privilege in Nigeria, not because people can't, but for example, you have corruption that says, you know, I'm not sure what the current state is, but at one point, for example, in a country that has 360 days of sunshine, mostly other than a few rainy seasons, you can't import solar panels. But we have no manufacturing for solar panels and we have no reliable energy. So people end up having to use oil and fuel and generators. One, because the country is made wealthy through oil because it's an oil-rich country. And two, because generator companies don't ever want to reduce their sales, and having an unreliable power situation creates demand for their product. So you have kind of political systems working against being climate conscious in Nigeria, you know, and that's just one example there. You also have the kind of, if you consider some kind of Maslow-like hierarchy of needs, job security, housing, shelter, food, these are primary concerns for people.
Sure.
A kind of like 100 years projection into the future of climate emergency, probably less prescient when you're not necessarily sure where your next meal is coming from. So being able to, you know, I'm very privileged in my personal upbringing, but as with many places, you have a lot of access to people who aren't. And in Nigeria, it's very, you know, the haves and the have-nots are very close together. So you can see that you're not going to be able to get the person next to you recycling just because they you know, they want to, and actually they just have bigger problems. So I am very conscious about my impact and that of my family. And I think there are things that we could do. And certainly as it relates to like choices we can make, I think every little thing counts and matters. I simply also weigh up this other scenario in relation to like my family back home, in that it's just not an option for them in the same way. And actually, I don't even know how to do it in Nigeria because I don't live there, I visit. So I don't have the network effect to be able to kind of make a difference in that particular country.
It's important, isn't it, to know it's sort of like you can't just export the solution to the problem that works. You know, we live up here in Scotland, something that works here isn't gonna just work. Even down in England, it won't necessarily work.
Well, so, and this is in a different country.
Yeah.
And this is something else that I think as a theme a lot in my, like in my design thinking, and sometimes the talks I do, and certainly where I choose to spend my time, you will hear me talk about equity as opposed to equality, because fairness isn't necessarily the same solution for everyone. It's the right solution for the right needs.
Okay, can you unpack that a little bit, what you mean by equity in relation to design as well, right?
Okay, so equity speaks to what is the right thing that allows everybody to be on a level playing field. The way we talk about equality is if I have £10, I'm going to give everybody £1, and that is the equal and fair thing to do. But that assumes that everybody is starting at zero. So everybody who gets £1 has £1. The reality of the world is that some people will be starting in debt. So if you give the person who has a debt of £5 £1, they'll be in less debt. But then if you give the person who has £5 £1, they'll be, they've got 6. And so the gap is actually being maintained between those two groups. Now, there's an argument that this is quite a socialist mindset and, you know, you can't penalize one group to support another. which if you want to talk about it in terms of capitalism, fine. What I try and think about it is more in the same way we look at inclusive design. I'm not going to force somebody who is wheelchair bound or vision impaired to use a service in the way that is designed for somebody who is fully physically able or has 20/20 vision. It doesn't make any sense. I'm effectively keeping them out. What I can do is, if I make sure it's designed inclusively with them in mind, I actually make it fairer for everybody, because the person who's physically impaired and 20/20 vision can use it as well as. And so that's why equity to me is a more appropriate framing for a lot of things. It's the as well as context, as opposed to instead of, or prioritizing needs, or trying to be equal in a way that actually doesn't address root causes of kind of inequity and challenges in society that different groups face.
Okay, so how does that sort of inform your sort of thoughts on the environmental sustainability situation, right? I mean, what is it, just that some countries who are richer need to do more? And that's a simplistic way of doing it.
No. What it does is it makes me very critical of Western activism in underdeveloped or developing countries.
Okay.
So, for example, you'll see, I can't remember exactly where I saw it, but a lot of funds that raise money in the West and are doing work in, say, various places across Africa will try and create environmental credentials that suit their donor community. So we will only do this, we will only use these materials, we will only behave in this way. But their work is actually being done in a country where, by doing that, they are actively undermining the economy locally.
Is this, for example, some of these tree planting projects, for example?
They can be tree planting projects, they can be mobile hospitals, and forgive me for not having the exact name for one in particular that was basically providing mosquito nets somewhere in Eastern Africa. But because of the credentials that they put on about plastic, which are very, very good and well-meaning, it means that they are importing them as opposed to buying locally produced.
Okay.
So they're providing aid and undermining the economy locally. And so I don't expect everybody to lean into solving all of the problems. This is not about killing philanthropy or it's just recognizing that it's problematic to import or export your approaches in a holistic way. So that's one example.
Philanthropy is all well and good, but it doesn't mean that everybody who's being philanthropic is doing the right thing.
And I think the climate community probably needs to hear that. I think we've got a long way with sort of the classic feeding charities and all of that stuff, where we're you're undermining economic development in certain countries. People now kind of have a bit more of a awareness about there are right ways to do this and wrong ways to do this. I think with climate, we're still trying to export an agenda.
And actually, I think that jumps out to you, from the climate. Is there an example that you?
Well, I think the plastics one is a really good one.
Okay.
So, for example, one of the challenges that we have in Nigeria is that you cannot. There's no water supply, national water supply. There's no national water grid, so everybody has to buy water, and so you end up with a huge amount of plastic in the country, and it is a real problem. But that is the only, kind of financially accessible means of accessing clean drinking water for, a country of 200 million odd people. And so what are those policies that we actually need to put in place in Nigeria that would address that? They probably start with addressing the underlying issue of access to clean water, as opposed to starting with the climate issue of we need to reduce plastic. But certainly in deals that are being made between countries. So I think IMF, notorious in lots of things, and one of the UN agencies, they're ratifying ideas around mandating things on plastic on the ground in countries that don't necessarily have access to clean drink. So reusable bottles are great, but they're also expensive and not necessarily accessible in the same way. So there are all these things, and those are examples to me of not the wrong intention, definitely the right intention. It's just the wrong solution
Okay, so the plastic bottle situation, for example, is, I guess the intention is to reduce the amount of plastic being used and the eventual pollution that results from that. But the effect that's being felt in certain places is that, well, where these people suddenly don't have something to carry their water in, or or actually drink from, because it's too expensive to buy this thing, or else I have to import it. And so
in order to access it, well, even as a
the money is being
example,
sent outside of the sort of the local economy.
Yeah, so things that have been discussed in Nigeria previously is like, in the same way we have a sugar tax in the UK for like discouraging people from accessing sweet goods that make them fat. In Nigeria, there was considered like a plastic tax to discourage people from overbuying plastic and kind of moving towards reusability. This will directly affect a bunch of people who, so, the things we don't know about in the UK is like in Nigeria and I think quite a few parts of West Africa, people buy water in plastic bags. And that is the cheapest form. You literally buy a sachet of water in a plastic bag.
Yes, I've heard of that actually, because a couple of friends of mine used to live in Ghana, where I've seen
it's super common and it's easy to kind of move around, and a quick way to access water. Is way cheaper than accessing a plastic bottle or like a water dispenser. If you add a plastic tax to that,
you're taxing drinking water, basically.
You're literally taxing, and this is my point. So it's like we have to become. So I mean, I'm not an expert on these issues. I don't work in like policy development, but I think one of the things that I just recognize that like I have a privilege to act in a way that's very Western friendly in terms of climate policies because I live in the West, and at the same time I do have this lens and lived experience of family members and my own experience of being in Nigeria where none of that would work because it fundamentally undermines people's right to just exist. To a certain extent, and
there is a kind of
dichotomy there.
Yeah, there is a kind of a difference of like, I suppose, a plastic tax in the UK where literally so much unnecessary plastic is used over and over, on a daily basis. The sheer amount of, you've got tomatoes wrapped in plastic and a single cucumber wrapped in plastic, and you get deliveries of all kinds, everything in sort of layers and layers of plastic. And that is very, what's the word? Kind of...
it's just wasteful.
It's wasteful and it's kind of entitled. It's selective in a lot of ways. You don't need all of that.
Yeah.
And sort of you kind of... So I guess maybe I'm trying to understand if this is sort of one of those equity kind of scenarios that you were discussing before, which is, it's not the same, right? If you're using all of this plastic here for unnecessary stuff.
Yeah, so for example...
versus somebody who's using it just for transporting the daily water needs.
Yeah, so if you go to a market in Nigeria, in Abuja where my mother lives, like for love nor money, you're not going to find plastic around any food. It's just not there. People don't shop that way. People don't sell that way. People don't package that way. The only place you'll find plastic is drinking water. And so you end up with this scenario where like, if we arbitrarily say like, we'll use global NGOs and advocacy groups to enforce climate friendly practices based on Western activities, you're not necessarily considering that on the ground in certain places, they don't have a plastic problem in that way. So like Nigeria's plastic problem is actually plastic from the West washing up on the coast, or rubbish being dumped from the West being brought to Nigeria. It is not a homegrown overuse of plastic because we just don't live like that.
In an equitable world, that would be taxed the other way around, where Nigeria would be taxing the countries that originates from. But
for the amount of plastic being dumped. And so,
they have to clean and dispose of, and the other effects to the local kind of, well, just quality of life, I suppose. So what are your thoughts then on organizations, on activities like Extinction Rebellion in the UK? Because they've come under, I have mixed feelings about them, to be honest, but they've come under a lot of criticism about being kind of like tone deaf when it comes to these kinds of issues of, kind of representation. Do you think that's fair criticism, or?
So I'll caveat this. I don't know enough about the foundations of Extinction Rebellion. What I'm going to use as my reference point is something I have come across a lot in the UK, which is it is a privilege to dedicate all of your time to fighting a single issue. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply recognizing that that means you're not having to work, or somebody else is providing money for you to live in order for you to kind of fight on that issue.
For sure.
And the individuals that I have met that have associated with Extinction Rebellion, so again, I'm not generalizing the whole thing, don't even have that because they come from wealthy families. So one of the challenges that I see is that they are tone deaf because they literally have nothing but privilege, and they are able to demand change from everybody else, but they are products of money themselves. Mm-hmm. That's not a general statement. I think on the flip side to that, if something matters enough, it has to make people uncomfortable.
Yes.
And if it doesn't make people uncomfortable, nothing changes. And so I don't know that through their actions, we won't necessarily see positive impact in the way that the UK, for example, makes decisions about climate policy or considers climate policy at the heart of every type of decision they need to make. Because it's not like, let's now talk about the climate. It's no, let's talk about infrastructure and keep the climate in mind during infrastructure planning.
Sure.
Right. So I don't know that that isn't going to be the case, because the evidence I see across the world is that activism does change things.
Oh,
it can
for
be a
sure.
long slog.
For sure.
And so I don't think there's a
evidence,
polite
right?
way. Yeah, there's no polite way to make people uncomfortable. From the moment you're making people uncomfortable, somebody's going to criticize your method. And so I kind of see that as the duality of Extinction Rebellion. I see individuals who are privileged enough to not have to worry about where their next meal is coming from, or if they can never get a job again, because as soon as they finish this, they can go and, be employed. And then at the same time,
but so here's
going to change things.
Here's my last question for you, because we have about enough time for one last thing. And so this question of privilege makes, I was actually discussing it recently with somebody, because I have the privilege of being able to have this kind of free time on my hands to be able to do this kind of projects, for example, right? And while I'm not wealthy, that is a privilege that many people don't have. So that's kind of one thing, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't do it, right?
Absolutely.
But here's the question I have for you, framing it in the context of tackling sort of these hard, wicked problems that we mentioned at the beginning. How do you do something like that without being tone deaf, right? And I don't mean like, the simple answer is, go talk to people, but which people? How do you navigate that kind of map of, well, we have a wicked problem that affects literally everybody, and so we have a million opinions. What do you do?
So I love the original framing of wicked problems. So like they have 10 principles or 10 characteristics of wicked problems. And I try and stand by those, because, one of them that always sticks out to me is no wicked problem is the same in two contexts. And this is something that I think people ignore. If I can solve poverty in Guatemala, I cannot necessarily take every single one of the things I did and then implant them to Siberia to solve poverty in Siberia. Why? Because context matters. And I think this is a challenge with activism, like context matters. Sometimes, and maybe my bias is towards like, locally grown solutions tend to be the ones that are most appropriate to address the issues that you see within that environment. And climate activism is one of those where, like, across the world, our biggest threats are multinational companies that try and create universal things, but our biggest opportunity is having locally grown solutions and local activism that understands what exactly is needed in that place in order to make a difference to what is happening in that place.
Right.
So I don't, and to answer your first point, privilege isn't a dirty word. I have a huge amount of privilege, and what I do is I acknowledge it and I use it wisely, and I don't assume that because I can, so should everybody. I recognize that, like, I'm making a set of choices because I have a set of opportunities, and I think everybody who has privilege simply has to recognize that's like all that it is. And not to say don't use it or don't spend the time, because again, if people don't commit time to these types of activism, we're kind of doomed as a society. Like
Right.
freedoms are fought and changes are made and opportunities are created through activism and through people who dedicate time to activism. So having the privilege to be an activist is a really good thing. Or having the support infrastructure that allows you to be an activist is a really good and important thing. So I don't criticize that. I simply recognize that, like, it's about using that wisely as the individual who is privileged. Know that you're doing what you can within your means. And so the expectation that everybody should do as you do is where it falls down. But if you can make a change in your own way and other people can make a change in their own way, and we're pulling in the same direction and we understand all of the mechanisms at work, that's like the economics of an environment, the politics of an environment, and the climate impact of that environment, then in theory we should be able to work through this. But there is like one final thing about wicked problems that is my framing, is they're wicked because they're human problems. And people are, like, we're dog shite. Like, given the opportunity to have one up on someone else, we'll prioritize that over creating balance and equality, even when we think we're all really good people. So wicked problems persist because humanity, it's just what we do. And so there is always work to be done, and we shift our lens to, like, this, at this point in time, the root problem was this issue. So like in Nigeria, the root problem might be like access to clean water, and we may be able to solve that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we will take away the water problem, because I tell you what the next issue will be the fact that companies that in the West can't sell plastic bottles are still really happily doing it in Nigeria. And so they will be bribing and creating corruption in order to keep selling plastic. So suddenly it's still the same issue, too much plastic in the community, but the root cause has moved to corruption away from access to water. That's wicked problems. And so there's never going to be a shortage of work to do. That's kind of just humans. We'd like to stay busy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you very much. I know that this was a short, intense conversation, but I think it's one of the most interesting ones I've had. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
One housekeeping question.
Yes.
Just so that when I record the introduction to this, when we come to publishing it, I get your name pronounced properly. Could you tell me how I should say your second name, your surname?
Yeah. Try and say it, like, guess, because there are no hidden. Well, I can tell you, there are no hidden letters. There are no hidden sounds. It's exactly what you see.
So the way I would have said it is Lola Oyelayo. Is that fine?
That's absolutely perfect. Perfect intonation and everything. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'll let you get on to your next meeting, and good luck with carrying on the settling in. I'll ping you, drop you an email when we're publishing. Okay, it's going to be a few weeks out, but we'll get there.
I hope I haven't offended anybody, but I'm sure I will have. That's kind of the nature of these things, isn't it?
Yes, unfortunately.
It is what it is.
Yes. Let's hope it's the right people.
Exactly.
Okay.
Bye. Lovely talking to you, Richard. Thank you so much.
Bye for now.
Me too. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please visit fatalarea.blog to join our mailing list and help support our community and project. And if you like the music, please check out the Happy Quartet on Bandcamp. That's it for today.